Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story. 1 week, two world leaders, Trump and Putin, both in Beijing. Same stage, very different agendas. So who came out on top?
Overall, it's a case of damage control, losing more or losing less, or giving more or giving less, rather than a clear diplomatic victory.
Following hot on the heels of President Trump's visit, Russian President Vladimir Putin was in Beijing with new China-Russia agreements on Wednesday and reactions from U.S. allies in the Indo-Pacific. Taiwan President Lai Ching-te saying he's open to speaking directly with President Trump. Both Beijing and Taipei are now reacting as Washington weighs a major arms sale to the island. And two China hawks were nominated as ambassadors to key U.S. allies in the Indo-Pacific region. Both signaled a tougher approach toward the Chinese Communist Party. Within a week, China's Xi Jinping met face-to-face with President Trump and then with Vladimir Putin, both in Beijing. It's being seen as one of China's biggest diplomatic weeks in recent years. And it's raising an immediate question. When you compare the two visits, the ceremonies, the delegations, and the deals, who actually came out on top? Here's our analysis.
On the surface, the two arrivals look remarkably similar. Both leaders got the ceremonial works. Red carpets, children waving national flags, a military band on Tiananmen Square, a state banquet, and a personal tea meeting with Xi himself. Look closely, however. Trump was greeted at the airport by China's vice president. Putin's airport reception was handled by the foreign minister. On the Chinese side, the seating arrangements were also revealing. One additional member of the Politburo Standing Committee, serving as first executive vice premier, sat with Xi during the Putin meeting, but he didn't appear at the meeting with President Trump.
Xi Jinping must receive President Trump warmly due to the immense weight and importance of the U.S.-China relationship. He also needs to demonstrate to the Chinese public that he can manage this critical relationship effectively. In contrast, Xi's warm reception of Putin serves a quite different purpose. To show Trump that he holds a Russian card, and second, to retain Putin's loyalty.
President Trump's visit lasted 3 days. He arrived alongside several top officials, including the Secretary of State, the Defense Secretary, the Treasury Secretary, and the U.S. Trade Representative. The agenda centered on trade and economy, with Washington pushing for China to buy more American goods. Putin's trip was shorter. It ran for 2 days. But his delegation was notably larger. He brought nearly half the cabinet, including 5 deputy prime ministers, 8 ministers, and the head of Russia's central bank. After Trump's visit, there was no joint statement or formal agreement. But both sides did announce the creation of 2 new committees focused on trade and investment. The White House said China agreed to purchase 200 Boeing aircraft. It also pledged to buy at least $17 billion in U.S. farm products annually for the next 3 years, beginning this year. On top of that, Beijing committed to continuing an existing agreement to buy U.S. soybeans. The contrast with the Putin summit was clear. Beijing and Moscow issued a joint statement pledging to deepen their strategic cooperation and signed more than 40 cooperation agreements. With Washington, Beijing kept its message simple: stable ties, no rupture. And with Moscow, it signed a full slate of new agreements, signaling that the China-Russia partnership hasn't been shaken by U.S. engagement. Some analysts say Xi came out as the clear winner. As host, he benefited from what some call a home court advantage, using the week to project Beijing as a central hub of global diplomacy.
She did reap some host dividend, but mostly in appearance rather than substance. She was essentially coerced into committing to purchase more U.S. goods and made no meaningful progress in persuading the U.S. to reduce military support for Taiwan. But on the Russia side, he was forced to provide even more resources to prop up Putin and his war effort. Overall, it's a case of damage control, losing more or losing less, or giving more or giving less, rather than a clear diplomatic victory.
And there may be more to come. Reports suggest Xi may soon visit North Korea. If that happens, it would send a clear signal China's influence isn't limited to Russia. North Korea is also on the table. Together, these moves appear designed to show that the multipolar world Beijing and Moscow talk about isn't just a vision. It's already taking shape.
The U.S. can easily counter that by deepening its relationship with Taiwan. Ultimately, whether a true multipolar world order emerges depends on the actual strength of nations. The Chinese Communist Party is currently mired in a sluggish economy with no clear solution in sight. In the long run, history will likely show that Xi's diplomatic maneuvers will not address China's core problems and will yield little result.
Reactions are building over possible talks between President Trump and the Taiwanese president. Taiwan's foreign ministry says Taiwan President Lai Ching-te would welcome the opportunity to discuss peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. Here's what Lai had to say about speaking with President Trump on Thursday. Taiwan's defense minister added the U.S. has repeatedly reassured Taipei that its policy toward the island has not changed. The comments come as the Trump administration weighs a proposed $14 billion arms package for Taiwan, a plan Beijing strongly opposes. Beijing has also repeated its opposition to both arms sales and official engages with Taipei. The Chinese Communist regime considers Taiwan part of its territory despite never having ruled the island. Taiwan rejects Beijing's sovereignty claims, saying only the people of Taiwan can decide its sovereignty. When speaking to reporters earlier this week, President Trump said, quote, "I'll speak to him. I speak to everybody." When asked about Taiwan President Lai Ching-te. China hawks nominated as ambassadors to key U.S. allies in the Indo-Pacific region both signaled a tougher approach toward the Chinese Communist Party. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
Two longtime China hawks are looking to serve in key ambassador positions right on China's doorstep. Former California Congresswoman Michelle Steele, President Trump's pick for ambassador to South Korea, and former Virginia Congressman David Bratt, nominated for Australia, have long taken confrontational stances against the Chinese Communist Party.
There is no free trade with a totalitarian regime that controls everything. They have no profit motive, right? They control the balance sheet and profit statement of every firm.
Confucius Institute was CCP's propaganda. We had over 200 universities had that, and CCP was actually spreading their propaganda to our students.
At the nomination hearing, Steele told senators the U.S.-South Korea alliance is critical for regional security. She drew on her family's escape from North Korea during the Korean War and highlighted growing trilateral coordination with South Korea and Japan against North Korean weapons programs and Chinese aggression.
We need very strong alliance between United States and Japan and South Korea. It's not just protecting South Korea, but it's protecting all Indo-Pacific region.
Meanwhile, Dave Bratt emphasized the need to push back on Beijing's military buildup and economic coercion.
Amidst China's unprecedented military buildup, the U.S.-Australia alliance is an essential pillar of regional stability and deterrence.
And calling out China's dominance of rare earth minerals.
What is so important about the rare earths, the minerals, and the processing is that they're vital to every aspect of the economy, every aspect of our economy. Not just the F-35s, not just the submarine engines, your lawnmower engine, et cetera, right on down the line, where China's got 90% of the processing around the world.
In October, Trump hosted Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese at the White House, announcing progress on rare earths to reduce dependence on China.
Australia is one of our most important partners in countering China's influence in the Indo-Pacific.
It's also important for critical minerals, for countering Chinese coercion in the Indo-Pacific.
Last August, Trump met with South Korean President Lee Jae-myung in Washington, finalizing a trade deal reducing U.S. tariffs on South Korean goods to 15% in exchange for Korean investment of $350 billion in U.S. shipbuilding and energy, among other sectors.
American companies operating in Korea deserve the same market access that Korean companies enjoy in the United States.
The nominations come as the Trump administration's deepening security and economic ties with allies in the Indo-Pacific to counter China's increasing aggression. Now, if confirmed, both Steele and Bratt are expected to advance this hardline approach on the ground. For NTD News Washington, I'm Jack Bradley.
Russia and Belarus continuing nuclear military drills on Thursday. This comes as a report says the Chinese Communist Party helped train Russian soldiers for the Ukraine war. Russia denies the claim. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pozdar has the latest.
Russia's defense ministry says strategic nuclear-capable missiles are being included in ongoing nuclear exercises. Footage shows missile launch vehicles driving through forests, nuclear-capable planes taking off, as well as ships and submarines at sea. Russia also delivered nuclear munitions to storage facilities in Belarus as part of the drills. A Kremlin spokesman suggests Russia hopes NATO and the West take note of the drills.
Any exercises are part of military development, and any military drills are a signal.
Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin saying Moscow relies on its nuclear weapons.
Given the growing tensions in the world, our nuclear triad must serve as a reliable guarantor of the sovereignty of the Union State of Russia and Belarus.
And according to a new report by Reuters, the Chinese regime secretly trained about 200 Russian military personnel in China late last year, and some have since returned to fighting in Ukraine. Beijing has repeatedly claimed that it's neutral in the conflict, and the Kremlin on Thursday denying that the new report is true. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Coming up, a high-tech race between the U.S. and China. The U.S. is awarding $2 billion in grants to American quantum computing companies. And when it comes to the AI race, what's the scale of Chinese infrastructure propping up the data centers? And what are the steps to unwind it? Rex Lee joins us. More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A high-tech race between the U.S. and China. The Trump administration is awarding $2 billion in grants to 9 quantum computing companies. The government will take equity stakes as part of the deals, as first reported by the Wall Street Journal. The report says the Commerce Department has agreed to provide $1 billion to IBM, and GlobalFoundries is set to receive $375 million. Other companies, including D-Wave Quantum, Rigetti Computing, and Inflection, are expected to receive about $100 million each. Startup Dirac could receive $38 million. The investments are part of a broader push by the Trump administration to take equity stakes in companies seen as critical to the U.S. supply chain and to counter China's dominance in key industries, including chipmaking. Quantum computing uses the laws of quantum mechanics to process information far faster than traditional supercomputers or on complex problems. And because it can process information much faster, quantum computing matters to the military since it could significantly speed up the development of security and intelligence systems. Russian President Vladimir Putin visits China shortly after President Trump, marking a rare back-to-back sequence of high-profile engagements in Beijing. The moves come amid an increasingly complex rivalry. And a geopolitical chain reaction is unfolding across Asia. Here are the details.
Russian President Vladimir Putin visiting China from May 19th to 20th and met with Chinese leader Xi Jinping on Wednesday. The visit came just 4 days after President Trump concluded his trip. Like Trump's delegation of top cabinet officials and major business leaders, Putin arrived with a large senior-level economic and political team, including 5 deputy prime ministers and 8 cabinet ministers. In Beijing, Putin was granted a similar high-level reception to President Trump, featuring a welcoming ceremony at Tiananmen Square, a state banquet, and an intimate tea meeting following formal talks. Opening the summit, Putin used the Chinese idiom, "A single day apart feels like 3 years," expressing strong anticipation and close friendship. He declared that Russia-China relations are at an unprecedented height, calling the partnership a global model. Xi Jinping reaffirmed that their ties will continue with high-quality development. Despite a series of new agreements, one major piece is missing. Advancing the Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline was a core item during the Putin-Xi summit. While a Kremlin spokesperson said a basic understanding on the route has been reached, the pipeline was not included on the Kremlin's official list of summit achievements, suggesting there has been no concrete breakthrough at this stage. As the Trump-Xi summit wrapped up, Washington's first island chain allies immediately responded. On his return trip to Washington, President Trump called Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, briefing her on his talks with Xi. Takaichi went public with the news, reaffirming the Japan-U.S. alliance. She then traveled to South Korea to meet with the country's president. Following that meeting, she announced bolstered energy security cooperation, specifically targeting critical minerals to promote a free and open Indo-Pacific.
And when it comes to the AI race, what's the scale of Chinese infrastructure propping up the data centers, and what steps are needed to unwind it? We're continuing our conversation with Rex Lee, cybersecurity advisor at MySmart Privacy. And to your earlier point about China leveraging AI, if you will, in the workspaces, former FBI Director Christopher Wray was talking about how AI is an amplifier. It could be either used for good or, in China's case, amplify misuse. Given the dependence in terms of the global data centers that you just laid out here, what does that mean in terms of national security if we're dependent on these parts and infrastructure from China?
Well, there's something very highly concerning regarding Huawei, ZTE, Inspur, and Sugan. These are noted companies that are banned from deploying any infrastructure in the United States because they were identified as cybersecurity threats, along at that time with ByteDance and TikTok. Since then, what we've seen is a great effort regarding lobbying by these Chinese companies. One of the noted lobbyists for Huawei in the past was the fact that they had hired Tony Podesta, a former presidential advisor to Clinton and Obama, as their chief lobbyist. So when you go back and you look at the infrastructure that's being built in these data centers in the United States, I don't know if there's been any oversight to see that there isn't Huawei infrastructure, ZTE, Sugan, or Inspur, and other companies that are noted as cybersecurity threats regarding critical infrastructure. People are only focused in our government, it seems, on the building of a 5G network by Huawei, but not realizing that Huawei builds infrastructure for other technologies. One of them being digital currency. A lot of the digital currency rails around the world are built by Huawei. So as we become more dependent on digital currency, Bitcoin, stablecoin, and so forth, a lot of these transactions that are going to be made through digital currency globally, many of them are going to travel along Huawei's digital currency technology rails that are interconnecting financial institutions, including here in the United States. And, you know, the several CEOs like Larry Fink of BlackRock went on this trip as well, and the CEO for Citibank also went on this trip with Trump. So they're cutting deals with Chinese financial institutions at the same time. And a lot of these organizations like BlackRock are betting big on digital currency as well. So there's huge cybersecurity threats that are tied all along this infrastructure that we're seeing put in around the world and here in the United States.
And given those cybersecurity and national security threats, what would be your advice to federal governments, concerned citizens, companies, in terms of pulling out or away from these dependencies and risks here?
What amazes me is every time I hear a government official say we're in an AI race with China, we're not. Not in a traditional race with them, because although China is dominating on the manufacturing side of this, you have to look at who China has to depend on for their AI. And we've talked about this many times in the past. Nobody in the world who manufactures or develops AI apps, platforms, chatbots, AI essential digital systems, even the coming quantum computing, all of that is dependent on three companies that are headquartered here in the United States, which is Google, Apple, and Microsoft. So although we see China dominating in these other areas regarding this infrastructure, they're still reliant on Google, Apple, Microsoft, and to some extent NVIDIA for the GPU chips needed for China. Needed for the delivery of AI. Again, Jensen Huang of NVIDIA also went on this trip with Trump to China recently. So again, you're starting to see deals being cut, and I'm doing a little bit of research. There's already been some news on the deals that are being cut, but the way I see it today is both countries are interdependent on each other. Chinese AI manufacturers, it would be easy to win the AI race with China if Google, Apple, and Microsoft would just stop sharing their AI IP with Chinese AI developers, because they need our AI IP to develop their apps in Android, iOS, and Windows. And if Google, Apple, and Microsoft would simply stop distributing all AI-infused apps, platforms, social media platforms, and digital currency platforms developed in China, that would end the AI race tomorrow. It's easily done, but that's never going to happen.
Rex Lee, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tiffany, for having me on.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. Round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.